The night was heavy still. The summer heat lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. Only the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze broke the silence of the quiet suburban neighborhood. Judge Nathaniel Nate Cole took a slow, deliberate breath as he guided his silver BMW 7 Series into the long, cobblestone driveway of his home. The car's headlights sliced across the pristine lawn and the carefully manicured hedges framing the property. It had been a long day, exhausting hearings, contentious deliberations, decisions that would alter lives in ways most people couldn't comprehend. He was drained, yet the sight of his house, a modest yet tasteful colonial-style home, offered a flicker of solace. As Nate parked in front of his two-car garage, he stayed seated for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, breathing deeply. Even after 2 decades on the bench, the weight of justice never lightened. Every verdict, every sentence carried consequences far beyond the courtroom. He knew that intimately. He had dedicated his entire life to navigating a legal system that wasn't designed for men who looked like him to succeed. Despite all the accolades, the judicial robes, the respect he commanded, he was still, too often, just another black man in a suit. Reaching for his worn leather briefcase on the passenger seat, Nate sighed, already thinking about the files he'd need to review before bed. The work never ended. He killed the engine and climbed out, stretching stiff limbs as the cool air surprised him. Across the street, in a black and white patrol cruiser parked beneath a street lamp, 2 officers, Ryan Mercer and Jacob Doyle, watched him. The two had been assigned to routine patrols in this affluent neighborhood, but their idle conversation ceased the moment they spotted Nate pulling in. "You see that?" Mercer muttered, nodding toward the BMW. Doyle squinted. "Yeah, don't recognize him. That car doesn't look familiar either." Mercer chuckled, adjusting his utility belt. "But he doesn't live here. This is high-dollar property. Old money. CEOs, high-powered attorneys. This ain't where you find a guy like that, especially not rolling up this late." Doyle hesitated. "We don't have anything on him. We're just guessing." Mercer shrugged. "Preventive policing," he said flatly. "We know how they get in these places, casing houses, making visits they shouldn't be making. Let's see what he's up to." As Nate approached his front steps, briefcase in hand, he paused. Years of experience told him he was being watched. He turned slowly, his sharp, deep-set eyes falling on the 2 officers emerging from their cruiser with an unsettling combination of purpose and suspicion. "Evening, sir," Mercer called out, voice tight. "Mind if we have a word?" Nate knew this moment before it began. He had presided over cases just like this. A black man in the wrong place at the wrong time, or in the right place but perceived as wrong. He kept his expression neutral, calm. "Can I help you, officers?" Doyle stepped up beside Mercer, his eyes flicking over Nate's tailored charcoal suit, his polished Oxfords, and the briefcase in his hand. But it wasn't admiration, it was judgment. "We got a call about a suspicious vehicle in the area," Mercer lied smoothly. "Just making sure everything checks out." Nate raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious vehicle?" He gestured toward his BMW. "That's my car, and this is my home." Mercer smirked without humor. "Do you have ID on you?" He had expected this. Years ago, he might have demanded to know why they were questioning him on his own property. But righteous indignation could be fatal when badges were involved. So he stayed composed. "My ID's inside," Nate said evenly. "But as I said, this is my house. I just returned from work." Mercer and Doyle exchanged a glance. It wasn't enough. Doyle pressed on. "What kind of work do you do?" Nate hesitated, not because he was unsure, but because he weighed how much truth they could handle. "I work for the federal government," he answered, watching the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Mercer's lips tightened. "We'll need to verify that, sir. You mind stepping inside and grabbing that ID for us?" Nate's jaw tightened. "You want me to go inside my house to prove it's mine?" His tone was even, but there was steel beneath it. Mercer folded his arms. "Just doing our job, sir. If everything checks out, no problem." There was always a problem. Nate could feel his pulse in his ears. If he complied, they'd push for more questions about his car, his presence, maybe even a search. If he refused, It could escalate. He glanced at his phone, unlocking it quietly with his thumb. Just in case. I think we're done here, Nate said finally. Mercer's brow lifted. Excuse me? You were investigating a suspicious vehicle. I told you the vehicle is mine. This is my home. I don't need to prove that to you. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Doyle's jaw flexed. We need you to comply. Or what? Nate asked, his voice low but unflinching. Mercer exhaled, then turned toward Nate's BMW. Let's take a closer look. Doyle gave a smug grin. Nate's stomach turned. They were escalating. He held his phone tighter. They circled the car like predators, boots crunching on the driveway. Nice car, Doyle remarked, dragging his hand along the smooth exterior. Mercer stopped near the front. You said this is your house. Nate nodded. I did. Mercer tilted his head. Funny. We patrol here a lot. Don't recall ever seeing you. I don't need to be seen by you to live here, Nate replied. Doyle chuckled. No need to get defensive. What's the address? Mercer asked. Without hesitation, Nate said 67 Alder Lane. They weren't expecting the smoothness of his answer. Doyle folded his arms. Then you won't mind showing ID. Nate remained composed. As I said, it's inside. You said you were for the federal government. Mercer sneered. What do you do? I'm a federal judge. That pause again. Subtle but telling. Mercer's smirk faded for the first time. Doyle blinked. A judge. Nate tilted his head. And what does a judge look like to you? Neither answered. Mercer adjusted his stance. It's late. Unfamiliar vehicle pulls in. We check it out. You've asked, Nate said. I've answered. What are you looking for? Doyle stepped closer. If you've got nothing to hide, cooperate. That line. Nate had heard it too many times. He took a slow breath. I don't consent to any search. Mercer chuckled. We're not searching. We're observing. Then Mercer yanked the door handle. Locked. Nate's fingers flexed. You're acting suspicious, Doyle said. Ow, Nate asked. You're nervous. You expect me to be comfortable while you violate my rights? Doyle's smirk faded. If you don't want this to escalate. Mercer turned to his radio. Possible trespassing, requesting backup. Nate's heart pounded. Backup for what? Then Mercer smashed his flashlight into the side mirror. Glass shattered. Nate inhaled sharply, standing rigid as rage flared within him. Step away from my vehicle, he ordered. Doyle scoffed. You think you're in charge? Mercer grinned. Man thinks he's important. I am, Nate said, his voice cold. And you're making the biggest mistake of your lives. Mercer laughed. Oh yeah? Why is that? Nate's eyes burned. Because you'll be explaining this to the chief judge. Mercer's expression flickered. Doyle paled. Wait, you're serious? My name is Judge Nathaniel Cole, Nate said, United States Federal Court. The air thickened. Mercer's hand dropped from his belt. Doyle swallowed. Then the black SUV rolled up. The driver stepped out, Deputy U.S. Marshal Eric Simmons. His presence was commanding, his badge gleaming beneath his tailored blazer. Your Honor, Simmons said, approaching quickly. Are you all right? Nate didn't break his stare from Mercer and Doyle. I am now. Simmons nodded and faced the officers. Names? Mercer mumbled. Officer Ryan Mercer. Jacob Doyle, Doyle added, voice faint. They assaulted me, Nate stated. Damaged my property. Accused me of trespassing. Simmons nodded. We'll take it from here. Mercer opened his mouth. We were doing our jobs. Simmons' glare cut him off. You didn't run his plates. Didn't ask for ID. You profiled him. Captain Henry Blackwell soon arrived, scowling as Internal Affairs was summoned. You two are done, Blackwell said coldly, stripping them of badges and weapons. You're lucky he's not pressing charges, Blackwell muttered. Yet. But Nate wasn't done. I want them off the streets. And I want departmental accountability. Simmons radioed Internal Affairs. Immediate review. The next day, headlines exploded. Nate stood at the press conference, unwavering. This isn't about me, Nate told the press. It's about a system that lets this happen. The chief squirmed under the spotlight. Nate's voice rose. We demand change. We demand respect. We demand justice. And for the first time, real change felt possible.